welcome to Community Forum. It's been a long time since I've appeared on the program, but nonetheless, we are in again for this year, 2024, with a very exciting and informative program, which I will just say at the outset, it may create some concerns, some angst, some feeling of remorse for some of you. So if that's the case, as we have this conversation, I say tune off for a minute, take a break, and come on back, because we hope to share with you information which is very, very important to each of those of us who are on this program today. I am so excited to be bringing this subject matter to you, and what we're going to be talking about is mental health and suicide. And my guest and I'll have them introduce themselves in a moment. Some are clinicians, others of us, or maybe all of us, are persons who have experienced persons in our lives who have suffered from mental illness and or death by suicide. So we're going to be talking about that. We want to discuss that issue, as well as we want to be able to bring some resources to you as well. So having done that introduction, I want to have a chance for you to meet my great guest. Now I'm going to start with, we're here in Stoughton, and I want first bring a person who is well known here in the town of Stoughton, involved with so many different things, Teresa Tapper. So good day to you, Teresa, and I'm going to say good day to you as well, Elizabeth.
Good day.
Teresa, would you, introduce yourself to our audience?
Hello. Yes, my name is Teresa Tapper. I'm a licensed mental health clinician. I currently work for the town of Stoughton at the Stoughton Youth Commission that offers mental health services for youth and families. I've been here for 17 years as a senior clinician. I also have been in the field. I was realizing, you can tell by my gray hair, for 40 years, which is kind of crazy, I realized recently. Yeah, thank you so much for including me on this very important subject.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And now you, Elizabeth Bostic, please tell us a little bit about you.
Thanks so much, Joseph, and it's nice to meet you, Teresa, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Elizabeth Bostic. I am, first and foremost, the proud parent and humble servant of King James, who was my medically complex child. My day job, if you will, is the Assistant Director for the Division of Children and Youth with Special Health Needs at the Department of Public Health. And their mental health is one of the Title V priorities, both for the children and youth, but also for the caregivers who are taking care of them every day. And so a lot of my focus has been based on my own personal experience of being a caregiver of a child with medical complexity, as well as having a daughter with mental health needs, and also a particular niche in working with families who are culturally and linguistically diverse, which came from my own experience of being an exchange student years and years ago. You can't see my gray hair, but it still does exist. So there's a lot of passion from my own lived experience and just general caring about people to really support folks with their mental health, especially coming out of this pandemic, which has only exacerbated what was already a crisis before.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. I just will simply say there's a little bit of feedback and distortion. And so if you can somewhat determine how you might be able to correct that, because there's some feedback. But let's talk about it. Well, for those who may not have been watching Community Forum from some time, my name is Joseph Feaster. I've been a host on Community Forum for at least now, started with Roy Cohen asking me in 2012 to do this particular program. So I guess that's now 12 years. I've been a host on the program. I have been living in the town of Stoughton for more than 25 years. And I served as the interim town manager. I've been a town meeting rep as well. But the focus of the program today is that we wanted to have it is because the three of us have a relationship to mental health and suicide in a very, very direct way. I, for one, have my son 13 years ago, death by suicide. I'm committed to working with and have been working with the Mass Association for Mental Health and for Samaritans. So we're going to be talking about the issue. And like I said, if this becomes a sensitive issue for you as you're looking at it, tune us off for a minute, come on back, because what we're trying to do here is impart some knowledge as to what you might do, and particularly those of us who are caregivers, how we can basically be responsive to this issue as it relates to mental health and or death by suicide. Teresa, I want to start with you because you're doing some clinical work in the town of Stoughton, working at a senior center and at a youth center. Talk about some of the things that you do, some of the resources that you that could possibly bring to bear as well in the work that you're doing here in the town of Stoughton.
Well, as I said, you know, Stoughton is a unique community in that we actually have services that are free mental health services for youth and families in Stoughton. This, you know, through the Stoughton Youth Commission. So the best way to reach us is just, you know, I'll give you my number, 781-341-2252. My extension is 9453. That's the primary contact that that we have for the Youth Commission. I also, just to let you know, I also run an ongoing bereavement group at the Council on Aging. So we meet Thursday mornings, 11:30, and that's ongoing, mostly for adults, seniors, but it's available for everyone and that's need from Stoughton and the surrounding communities.
So in that, and again, we'll have you repeat that again to repeat your information once again, Teresa, just simply so we have it, but we'll do that towards the end of the program. Okay. I know you can't talk about specific cases, but what are the types of, you know, if one was saying, well, should I utilize or can I utilize the services which Ms. Tapper provides, what would they be seeking to get from you? What considerations should they take into place in order to reach out to you for the services?
Well, first of all, it's always, you know, our office, during our office hours, you can reach out to me anyway, just for like guidance on, you know, what do you know, here's what's going on. This is, you know, I'm not really sure what to do. I'll be happy to try to walk you through whatever we can do. If it's involving youth, then we can offer some, you know, direct services for that youth, just offering some counseling services. Sometimes we do, you know, meet with children who have said something maybe at school of concern, and they'll come in for just a brief assessment to see, you know, how serious is this? Do they need immediate services? That means that they need to go to the emergency room, you know, to seek more immediate services, or is it just that they're very upset about something and they just need some support, some emotional support, and we can offer some guidance on whether it's just listening to them at that point and helping the parent figure out what are some resources that are available, or to offer mental health services and get them on our wait list.
Is there a fee for the services, Teresa?
No, it's free for Stoughton residents. We're very fortunate that the town has funded this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, I know in our conversations leading up to this program, we've talked about it, and you have a wide sphere of not only by being a caregiver yourself, but as well in the work that you do. Why don't you give our viewing audience some insights as to your experiences, either as a caregiver or more broadly, where you sit in the work that you are engaged in, particularly with the Commonwealth, how that might be a way in which people can get some relief or assistance if they're experiencing either mental health or even suicide ideations?
Sure. Well, very often when we talk about people in general, we separate kind of physical disabilities from mental health when in fact it's all health. So when we think about children and youth with special health needs, we don't separate the two. And often kids who have those mental health issues also may have developmental challenges or physical challenges, and one could be the result of the other, or that's just the way that they happen to be, they exist. So we spend a lot of time looking at children and youth holistically within the Department of Public Health and really trying to figure out how we can do a lot of more of that cross collaboration across agencies and communities to really have honest conversations about how to best serve these families and these children. Within our own division, there's a lot of talk about how do you actually work with the more non-traditional students, the kids who may use an augmentative communication device or who are deaf and hard of hearing. It's hard enough to find mental health services when you have what would be considered typical mental health. But then when you have those kinds of communication needs, it becomes even more challenging. So really helping to convene and collaborate with stakeholders and interested parties across the state on how to develop those specialized services. How do we make sure that we're making things as accessible as possible across the board? And then also doing that with a lens around racial equity, because very often when you start looking at different groups that are marginalized, then how do we ensure that they have access to it? And how do we reach them in a manner that helps them based on their own cultural lens, right? We all have different perceptions of disabilities based on the way that we've come into this world. So really working with them around that. There's also a lot of focus around respite. How do we support the caregivers who are taking care of these kids each and every day? And that's something that I have a lot of personal experience with and a lot of passion about, because often that gets left out of the conversation. Respite is a huge topic, and caregivers are a huge topic right now, but so much of the focus is on those who are taking care of the elderly. I have a great deal of respect for the elderly, and I have done that in terms of taking care of my own parents while also taking care of my medically complex child. So those families often don't get that kind of attention because it's just assumed, well, of course you're going to take care of your child. But people don't realize how much more work it is to navigate systems of care and support your own child, in addition to the regular stuff that you're doing every day, like trying to just survive and have a job and possibly have a life outside of taking care of a child. So I've been working a lot with the state around how do we expand services for our families? How do we make sure that eligibility is consistent? And recently have been involved in a project in partnership with the Federation for Children with Special Needs around a caregiver to caregiver respite network, where families who have children with similar profiles can support each other in providing that much needed break, because they all have that same lived experience and therefore understand how do you support a child that has this particular mental health issue or this particular developmental issue or this particular medical issue. So we're really looking for ways to expand those services. The other thing I'll say is that we're also working to make sure that places like Mass Options are aware of places that you can go and families can call to ask for services, whether it be respite or mental health services. And also within our own division, we have the community support line, which is free to any caregiver who may be looking for any kind of service here in Massachusetts to support their child with special health needs, including mental health. So we're doing everything that we can to be kind of a central location for families to be able to find services no matter where they are in the Commonwealth.
We're going to come back to where these resources are. I'm sure that some folks are probably trying to write quickly, as I was trying to do, to gather all of these resources. So we'll come back to restate those. But, you know, because we are so engaged and involved in this subject matter, it's just like government speak. Folks speak in terms of acronyms, and we understand what we're talking about. From you, I want to come to you, Teresa. I want to say, okay, can you, I don't know if there is such a thing as a definition for mental illness, but I know that there are all types of illnesses that are in the framework or the discussion around mental health, whichever way you think is best. And Elizabeth, you may chime in as well when I come to you, expanding on what Teresa might say. But if one says, well, this is the what the person is experiencing, what would be a diagnosis? I don't know if that's what you do when they come to you, Teresa, or they're diagnosed elsewhere and you're helping them through. So if you can, either one of you, define mental health, talk about some types of illnesses, because people hear things, if there's such a thing. I'm asking because I don't know the answer to that. And I want to just throw out things which our viewing audience may have a question to. So if there's such an answer, either one of you can please respond to that.
Oh my goodness.
It's a really broad question.
Yeah. Oh, listen, it's right. I wouldn't be a good lawyer if I didn't ask the hard question.
I wasn't prepared for that one.
Well, well, for instance, let me break it down. Let me make it in bite-sized pieces. I mean, I go through and I hear person has schizophrenia, a person has bipolar, a person has and is, there are names given to different types of illnesses under the rubric of mental illness. Is there such a clinical definition of what mental illness is, or is there not? If there isn't, fine. I'm barking down a tree that doesn't exist. But my sense is, if there is, I just want to give folks a understand. I want to get a place so people have an understanding of what the subject matter is. And if my question is not the appropriate one, then we can move on from there. But those are illnesses that come to mind because my son was diagnosed with bipolar. And so even there, define bipolar, if that's what it would mean, or schizophrenia as an illness. So I ask either one of you if that makes sense.
In a prior life, I was a special education advocate, and I worked with many families who had children with mental health challenges. And in my experience, I guess is the best way to put it, is it really comes down to how is a person responding to their environment, right? And so if you're finding that a person is having difficulty, doesn't have the kind of coping skills or resilience that would be considered typical, right? They can be defensive, or they pull in, or they become explosive, right? Those are all indications that something needs to be addressed from a mental health standpoint. It could also be sensory oriented, right? There are all kinds of things that can push a person to behave in ways that may be a bit more pronounced or significantly more pronounced than a typical person. So I focused less on the diagnosis and more on the behavior in certain environments, right? Because those were indications that we may need to help someone with either how they're perceiving what's happening around them or how they're coping with the environment that they're in. And I think for many parents, that's where you need to start. Is less around the label, if you will, or the diagnosis, and more around noticing trends and patterns that help us to understand that this child is having a difficult time. And very often, if you focus on that, it really can then help you to isolate, oh, okay, so they really are trying to avoid a particular type of situation. Or it seems when they're with certain types of people or certain groups of people, this sort of thing happens, right? And that then helps us to kind of peel the onion and say, well, where's the root cause for that? Why is that happening? Did they experience something that was abnormal? So that's when we get into those acronyms around ACEs, right? Or is there actually a chemical imbalance that needs to be addressed? But I think if you look at it from the standpoint of what are some of the things that you're observing about your child's behavior that may not be typical? And then also it removes the, oh my God, there's something wrong with my child, or, oh my God, they have mental health, which has such a stigma attached to it, to they may need to develop some skills that are a little bit different, right? That others that they haven't been able to pick up yet. And we can do that. And it may need to be coupled with some medical interventions. It's a possibility as well. But we can look at the child holistically and really see what are the trends and the patterns. So taking the time to really observe and see whether or not you can come up with those types of things often will help you get to the root of things faster. But when you think of it in those terms, as opposed to the huge umbrella of mental health, it shows up in many ways. And for some kids, it's long-term. Other kids, it could be short-term because they just recently lost their dog or someone significant in their lives. So it's important to connect patterns along with what are some of the outside influences that could really be driving those patterns. Would you think, does that make sense to you, Teresa?
Absolutely. I think you said that so well. I think of it actually as just if a person is in distress of any sort for whatever reason, for an extended period of time, they're experiencing some kind of mental health issue. The thing is, I would like you, Elizabeth, I really steer away from labeling, and attaching a label is not as important as just responding to how the person is doing at that given moment, and their support systems around them. Like, do they have the resources and support internally and externally? So the thing that's beautiful about getting back to the privilege of working for the town of Stoughton at the Youth Commission, because it's a free service, because it's already paid for us to offer this, we don't have to go by the guidelines established by the insurance companies. So I don't have to worry about labels, which is really nice too. I also am a fee-for-service clinician at other agencies, and so I do understand that whole procedure. And labels can be helpful in terms of maybe offering some guidance about okay, this is the type of treatment that's going to work, or these are the kinds of things that I should focus on to try to give some assistance to this individual. But actually, Elizabeth, I think that you just said it very eloquently. So.
Well, I see I have the two right persons on here, and like I said, I said I may as well be provocative and push the question of trying to put labels on it, because yes, from the standpoints of insurers, that's what they do. That you put in a code and you have to do it. But as caregivers and clinicians, say you're more concerned about what has caused the issue, how are the solution in terms of addressing that and getting it in. Now, I'm going to approach this again from the standpoint of what I read, and also from myself being a caregiver. I'm not a clinician, but having experienced it with my son, and with the organizations I'm involved with. So I'm going to get to the suicide piece in a minute, but I want to talk about it as far as what society we're experiencing. What I am told, and I'd like to hear from both of you. One, there's been an increase in mental health observations, mental health needs, particularly since the pandemic. It became evident, students not being able to go to school. They're doing things, from remotely. No social interaction, things of that nature. I also understand that there has been an increase, or maybe even a predominance within communities of color, particularly in terms of the Black community, that we're experiencing in terms of a younger age. In the sense, it used to be around 18 and 19. Now it's down at around 12 years old. It could even be beyond that since the last time that I checked. Can you both talk about that we're talking about certain cohorts of the population being affected? Have you seen the types of increases that I'm referring to or not? I'd like to hear from both.
Well, I'm just going to jump in and say absolutely. Since the pandemic, there definitely has been an increase, especially in anxiety, both anxiety and emotional dysregulation. Kids, well, actually adults as well. People are just having a hard time regulating their emotions. And I think it was just the lockdown, while it was necessary, as far as the immediate, we didn't know what to do during the COVID crisis, like how to respond to that. And, people were really concerned, and rightfully so, for the physical health. There were a lot of issues that have arisen following the lockdown in terms of mental health and just trying to be more resilient has been an issue. So there definitely has been an increase in anxiety, what I've seen personally, anxiety and just emotional regulation.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree. And even at the Department of Public Health, we have actually made the declaration that racism is a public health crisis. There are disproportionately impacted groups, Black families, Latino families, Asian families, Native American families who are suffering, and it is exacerbated by the institutional racism that is in our society as well. The pandemic has made it even more difficult for people to be able to access appropriate services that also take all of those things into account, right? So we are looking at ways, and have recently developed a strategic plan to really explore how we can minimize that gap in terms of accessibility, in terms of even breaking down policies and practices that get in the way of families being able to access the kinds of services that they need. And then when you couple that with within the African American community in particular, since that's what we're talking about today, our own bias around mental health. We struggle with this idea. And again, a lot of that is the result of the racism that we've inflicted on us, public health being and very often presented in the beginning as being anti-Black. You don't want to be this lazy person. You don't want to be this person. The intellectual inferiority that's been imposed on us as a community. So we fight against any perception that there's something wrong with our children, because very often it's not our own perception, it's something that's being pushed on us. And at the same time, we may not be recognizing that there may in fact be something that we need to be addressing. And if we're not, and it delays access to services because we're not actively seeking them. So we've got it coming from both sides. And so we really need to figure out how to create a dialogue amongst our own population so that we can remove the shame and the stigma attached to mental health, and recognize that some of that is created as a result of the system that we exist in. And then there are other factors as well. So we have a lot of work to do for a system that's existed for a very long time. But what's encouraging is that we're having the conversation. We're talking about it. So we can get started with getting beyond the talking and then actually getting to the doing.
I want to pick up on that. I got so many different notes here, and I'm glad that we're going to be doing this program for an hour because there's so many things that I want to cover, and I'm sure that probably won't be sufficient time to do it. But I want to come back to the stigma piece because I'm going to speak about it almost as if it was a historical one, whereby before folks would even have the conversation, you'd hear things like, oh, so-and-so is off their meds, but you really wouldn't have a conversation trying to talk about it. And no one wanted to talk about it. But as you pointed out, Elizabeth, the stigma still exists because even though we have programs in the employment setting, whereby there's programs where they have health programs that they have for their employees and all, employees don't want one to be able to tell them in the behavioral realm that they're experiencing something in terms of mental illness. So while we move the needle a bit on the question of stigma, the reality is stigma still exists. So that's one I want to explore. And then the other one is, we talked about it with the youth. I want to talk about, because you referenced this as well, Teresa, our seniors. We don't look at dementia and as, folks don't look at dementia. So I want to, again, I'm back to my labeling, but nonetheless, I want to talk about how it's affecting that intergenerational issues around mental health as well. So both of those issues, stigma and however you want to take it to the intergenerational one to our seniors as well. So whichever one of you want to go first.
Again, that's a lot.
I can't help myself.
Here's one of the things that I want to say, and I don't know if I'm going to say this very well. I think the other complication besides the stigma is, let's be honest, the people that are there's just not enough persons of color that are in the system doing the work as the helpers. And so I think that there has been, for good historical reasons, I think that there's a wariness. Can you really trust, all these, I'm just going to say as a white person, can you really trust all these white people, labeling me and, being able to do things for me? Are they really going to be there for me? So, if anybody's out there listening in terms of considering, what can they do if they're a younger person, I say go to college and, help become a clinician yourself, because I think that we need more there, as well as, in other fields too, teaching, etc. So that's kind of where my mind went a few minutes ago, because I just want to be honest about that. Having said that, I think that we're doing the best that we can. We're just trying to help out as best we can with the with the resources that we have available, and to continue to recognize and take into consideration what's going on and making adjustments as much as we can. So I think you can take from here, Elizabeth. Give you a few minutes.
I wholeheartedly agree with the whole kind of workforce challenge, right? You don't see someone who looks like you, and given the historical trauma, multi-generational trauma that's happened, intergenerational trauma that's happened here in the United States, then it's hard to fully trust someone who may be treating you who looks very different from you, right? You don't know that they understand. You don't know that they truly care, right? You want to believe that, but it's hard to make that leap of faith sometimes, right? So really working with our young people to understand that this is a field of great need, of significant value, and there are ways that we could help not only our own community but others, right? So if you don't see representation of yourself, then it's hard to think of yourself in that place. And I remember this very specifically for my own daughter, trying to find somebody who was a person of color, and we weren't able to do that at the time. And this was, years ago. So, but I imagine that that's very much the same today. In terms of the dementia piece, that's another very tough piece. There's a lot of research going on around the causes and the different things that are influencing what seems to be an uptick in that diagnosis. Is it just that we've gotten better at diagnosing it, or is there actually something else going on? And then, of course, the need for appropriate services. And also, how do you do this so that you're not in an institution, but you could actually get appropriate services in your community, and the person could be cared for perhaps at home? And then with the workforce crisis as it is, how do you get that consistency so that not only is the person who has been diagnosed with that particular condition, or others for that matter, gets what they need, and the mental health of the caregiver who is basically doing care and case management and possibly hands-on care if they don't have that support, their mental health is being impacted at the same time. And then there's that guilt that's associated with, I feel terrible and I don't want to do this anymore, but I can't not do this because who else is going to do it? And you're stuck, you're sandwiched and you're trapped and you don't know what to do about that. So it's really important for us to think about both the recipient of the care and the person who's actually orchestrating the care in whatever function that looks like, because both of them are going to need very different types of support, but supports nonetheless. And those don't exist in abundance in general. and least of all with people who look like us. And in fact, it's one of the things that we looked at very closely when we were looking at respite solutions is how do we ensure that families from similar cultures can actually support each other? Because Native American families in particular want nothing to do with anyone from the outside, given the genocide and the experiences that we've had. Similar things are happening in other cultures as well. So we have a lot of work to do to figure out how do we diversify our workforce? How do we help people to understand that this is something to explore and that could actually be helpful to multiple groups of people?
You know, I'm enjoying having this conversation with the two of you because you make my job easy trying to facilitate this conversation because you just lead, you know, you lean into where I would like to be able to go and just broadens my thinking on it. So I'm going to put a plug in for an institution that I have a relationship with, the William James College, who is doing teaching and trying to deal with the diversity of persons within the field, because beyond the racial or ethnic or gender resources within the profession, there's just not a whole lot of people in the profession and a whole lot of places, particularly trying to find inpatient situations for people who may require it. So, I mean, so it's almost, Elizabeth, as you mentioned, in the public health field, there's not a melding of both physical health and mental health, behavioral health. They just have not been equal in the practice of public health. And we're moving in the direction of trying to get some equality in that area, but I don't think we're there yet. So when we talk about the resources, just generally, if one is, I know the difficulty that I found with my son, not even trying to necessarily find a clinician of color, but just trying to find a place when he had an episode and trying to find a place for placement. I can recall that in one episode that my son had, and he was transported to the Boston Medical Center. What they had, because they didn't have a secure unit, they had a orderly sitting outside his room in terms of monitoring him. You know, my son was smart enough. He went down. He made it to the front door, but it was too cold. He didn't want to go out. So that was it. But there was no secure unit. Folks don't know who to call. If you call, I introduced the people. I just spoke on this subject recently, and have in the past. I introduced the people that you want to call. You know, I think it's Rule 12 or 12. I forgot exactly in terms of, but when you call the police department, you want to say Section 12. Excuse me, Section 12. That you want to talk about a Section 12 so that they know that this is a person who may be having a mental health episode, because you and I both know that oftentimes somebody gets hurt in that circumstances or in fact dies. So let's talk about that, those two issues. I mean, you've talked about the resource issue. I think we would all agree that there is a paucity of the resources, however you want, of providers. But let's talk about, because many people's introduction to this whole issue of a caregiver for someone with mental illness translates into picking up the phone, calling 911, and dealing with our, you know, in terms of our first responders. Let's talk about those issues in terms of your own experience. So I'm going to start with you, Teresa, and then I'm going to come to you, Elizabeth.
Well, and I just want to say that one of the things that is really important, and hopefully will be happening in the near future, is combining some mental health services when that 911 call comes into the police station, you know, so that the police are also having additional resources within the department. I know that they're at least Stoughton is in the works of trying to figure that out and see if we can get some additional services, mental health clinician that's going to be available and able to respond, because I think that's essential. That should be kind of a standard thing that should be happening everywhere. 911, yeah. Well, first of all, I'm going to say, you know, if you can call prior to that point, if you can call just even some hotlines to, like, you know, which I think are very important. And that's actually how I started in the business. You know, when I first I'll just talk about my personal journey for a second, if that's okay. When I first got out of high school, one of the first things I did during the summer, right after I was out of high school, is I volunteered. You know, I went through the 50-hour training to be on a helpline so that I could just, do that while I was waiting, for my next step. What was I going to do? And then I went into and then following that, I went into volunteered to go into the Army. And I had some personal experience of like having to deal with a friend of mine who was struggling. And maybe because of my extra training already, I was only 19 years old, but my friend was really, really in trouble. And I could tell that she was in distress, saying things that needed some help, that I personally wasn't enough to give for her. I ended up running around the campus trying to find some additional help for her because I felt like she was really at risk. We returned to the room and, found her, lying across her bed, passed out, both of her wrists slit open, pools of blood on the floor. Thankfully, still alive. So that was when I was 19 years old, firsthand, running to try to get some help, knowing that my friend needed some help. Thankfully, we were able to provide and save her. But that was a very traumatizing experience for me, but also like set me, I think, to continue on the course of like, I need to do something more. So when I got out of the service, this was in the days, again, gray hair, long before there were cell phones and stuff. So some of you younger people who might be listening to this program might be, well, why didn't you just call? No, that didn't exist. But then I went in and, started on my path like right away. Also went through another series of training, 100 hours of training to both be on the helpline there locally, again, as well as, Rape Crisis Center. So I was doing volunteer work for both of those agencies, and then continue my course, bachelor's in counseling, and then, now master's in counseling. So I digress. Anyway, so I think that that's really important to just share that there's some personal stories here that are weaved into why we're doing what we can. The other thing is, I went through, just for those of you who are listening, like, what do I do? Again, going back to what do I do? I went through a training here a couple years back at QPR, and it's specifically about suicide prevention. And, the key factor is like, if somebody is saying that they're suicidal or you're suspecting that they might be suicidal, don't be concerned about like actually using the word. Are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you thinking of, suicide? Because I think that a lot of people may be worried about saying something like that. I don't want to put that into their head. And I think it's really important to just say it straight out. You're not going to put that into somebody's head. If they're thinking it, they actually will find some relief in being able to say yes, or maybe, I don't know, I just don't want to live here. I don't want to live anymore, or, life is too tough, whatever. The key thing is to be okay with taking it seriously, getting some help. Don't leave them alone, and, try to find resources for them, which resources, thankfully, there are some at least immediate resources available. It's hard if you want to. I know that it's difficult for those who automatically just call 911 and have the police having to respond, whatever. But if you're in a desperate situation, that's what you're going to have to do. And, you know, hopefully get them on the course of getting some help.
You know, it was interesting as I was thinking about your question, Joseph, and listening to your story, Teresa. I had forgotten, well, I hadn't forgotten about a situation, but it just something resonated with me. Is my own family, we lost one of my siblings. He was hit by a drunk driver at the age of 10, 1/4 of a mile from our house.
Oh, dear.
And our family, in many ways, never really recovered for that. And I remember afterwards, years later, one of my other siblings ended up, because of his behavior, being hospitalized at McLean's. And my father ended up much later in life being homeless because I don't think he ever recovered from the loss of his son, along with some other things that had happened to him. So I remember at one point while my brother was in the hospital, we were going through therapy as a family. And I remember going into that setting being scared, very, very scared, like not knowing what to expect, because the unfortunate thing is that the way that hospitalization and mental health are portrayed are such extremes. And as opposed to places of healing, right? Medical hospitals, if you will, are considered places of healings. Mental health institutions are considered crazy places, right? And so I'm going into this environment going, what the heck, right? And being very guarded and not understanding why I'm even there to begin with. And because I didn't understand the interplay of family dynamics and natural supports and things that we all could be doing together to not only support my sibling, but also to support all of us, because we had all experienced trauma. We walked, but we were also kind of trained where, okay, so yes, this happened to you and we're moving on, right? We don't stop to say, you know, we need to take a moment to grieve, or moments or years. We need to acknowledge that there is a cycle. And we need to acknowledge that the most random things that you can't even make connections to could trigger you, right? And so if you have parents who aren't leading the way and modeling that, then what happened to my sibling was inevitable in some ways, right? We all hope in different ways based on our own personalities, on the resources that we've had, and the skills that we've been taught, right? If we had a better understanding of mental health earlier, we might have avoided having to go to the place of being hospitalized. And again, that wasn't a bad thing. It actually helped him a great deal, and it helped all of us. But we didn't know that was something that wasn't part of our language. It wasn't part of our discussion. It wasn't part of the way we were socialized to lean into that. And yes, we were the one Black family amongst all these other white families with these white practitioners, which also added a layer of fear, right? So we wanted desperately to get better. We wanted to do the right thing, and we were having difficulty processing it. And so instead of taking full advantage of it, I think we were trying to do whatever it is that they wanted us to do so we could get out of there as quickly as possible, right? And I think that showed up later on, because we were still dealing with stuff later. And I think my father was evidence of that in many ways. So, you know, I also was just talking with a colleague this morning before we came together, and talking about some cases that we're seeing of more and more families who have children who are in desperate need of therapeutic schools. Some need residential facilities because they need that consistency of environment and the significant lack of resources out there. The need has gone up so much that the kids who are in most need of those services are waiting for 3, 6, 9 months, right? And then as that's happening, they're at home, they're not getting what they need, so the condition is getting worse. And so then it gets even more difficult to find an appropriate setting for them, because they're going to need something that's even more specialized, and the pool has shrunk even more. And that is becoming a very common scenario. You know, when I started out in special education advocacy, having those kinds of cases maybe once or twice in the course of 10 years. It is now becoming every case that's coming in has some component around mental health that's really significant. So we have to really think about, from an educational standpoint, in our special education systems, what's happening in our communities, how are we supporting families, and how are we getting to this early and providing skills to these students so that they can talk about these things without the stigma attached to it, that their classmates can support them effectively. That peer-to-peer support is often crucial, which is something that your friend had the benefit of, Teresa. As hard as it was for you, you were able to do something, right? You knew what to do. You know, we have to get to a place in society where we really look at this holistically and understand that this need is, the pink elephant in the room is all different colors now. We really have to figure out how to address this, because otherwise the crisis is going to get worse, which is hard to imagine. But there are so many kids who are waiting.
I mean, you guys have been so great, and in terms, we only have about 6 minutes that is left here, so we won't even get to suicide. You're going to have to come back because we're going to have to be able to talk about that. But I want to draw some parallels, and I want to draw some lines in the sand and give some information so we can leave our viewing audience with something. Absolutely. One is, I will say, this pin that I'm wearing is Legacy Society for Samaritans. This is the society in terms of certain amount of contribution, but primarily wanting to support persons who have been caregivers who have been affected by death by suicide. One of the things that I want to emphasize, if you do have to call 911, mention Section 12. Put that on your, put it by your phone, whatever you have to do. That is going to be able to get to where Teresa talked about, where they are, like in Boston, they have the best team that are accompanying police officers. So they're trying to do in mental health providers, EMS. At least they know that this is going to be an episode, and I think that can turn out, because that was helpful when my son had his first episode. I was able to do that because I knew about Section 12. They said the EMS, they had an ambulance out there. They sent special box. That was the first hit. So I say Section 12, remember that. But Elizabeth, what you talked about, yes, there is the lack of resources that exist, particularly inpatient resources, and the persons who are waiting. Well, when they get involved in the justice system, that's probably one of the ways. That's one of the ways where they get treatment. I have my good friend Steve Tonkin, the sheriff in Suffolk County, tells me that better than 40-something% of his prisoners suffer from mental illness. So we know when they get court involved, justice system involved, they get treated. Another point you made was about the feelings. I'm 13 years out, and sometimes I can talk about my son, and I don't cry. There's other times I talk about him, I'm crying, I will recover, but that sense is not going to go away in terms of if you had a situation where you have had experience with someone with death by suicide. So I want to say to folks out there, hey, we caregivers, we understand. Understand. So we know that is like that Band-Aid. That sore is going to be there forever. It's like what you talked about, Elizabeth, dealing with your dad. So it's going to be there. A few more resource pieces as we go, because I want Teresa, you to speak a number for you, Elizabeth, to the extent that you can. Fine, I would like for you to do that, and I want you to promise to come back so we can deal with the issue of suicide, which we weren't able to cover in this hour. We talked about the National Alliance for Mental Illness, or NAMI helpline. Phone number 617-704-6264 or 1-800-370-9085. This is for NAMI, Massachusetts. Once again, 617-704-6264 or 1-800-370-9085. We will have this information posted as well when the program goes up, so you will be able to get it there as well. And there's the email, compass@namimass.org. That's compass, COMPASS, at namimass, mass.org. Samaritans, if you're talking about when Teresa said if you're feeling a sense or if one needs to call, they even have a line for youth that they deal with. So there's a new hotline, suicide and crisis hotline, the number 988. You can always dial 988 and you will get someone on the other end of that phone line. They have a crisis line for youth up to age 24. Samaritans here locally is called, you can text, Hey Sam, Hey Sam, SAM, at 4390726. So we're trying to get the resources there. You know, it's still a difficult thing. Teresa, give your contact information because we're coming up on about 2 minutes. Elizabeth, any contact information that you can give is fine. And I know, Teresa, you gave a number before. If you could give that again.
Yes. Okay, our number is 781-341-2252. 781-341-2252. That's for the Stoughton Youth Commission.
All right.
And I have a couple of organizations that I think would be useful for families, particularly of children. There's the Parent Professional Advocacy League, who works specifically with families who have children with mental health challenges. Their number is 617-542-7860. They're a fabulous organization. At the Department of Public Health, we have what's called the Community Support Line, which you can access by 800-882-1435. And then the other number that I'd love to give to you is also Mass Options, which really can put you into resources across the state as well. And that is 800-243-4636. So those are just a few. We probably could add a few more later on, but we don't have much time to do that. But we are always open to hearing from families and finding resources for them as quickly as possible.
Well, I want to thank Teresa.
Well, I do want to mention a couple other things too.
Well, what I would like you to do, why don't you send this to Roy?
Okay.
Let's send those numbers. Maybe we can get those posted up as well. Because we have about a minute. I just want to thank both of you. I want you to promise, because I like to get your commitment on air, that you will come back so we can do a program. Because we really haven't talked about suicide, which again, the incidences, I have statistics. Every 11 minutes, a person lost by suicide in the United States. So it is not something which is, you know, a minor issue. So I want to thank you both for joining me today. I will be back in touch to get to you. And I just, if you can get those contact information and resource information numbers, very much appreciated. Thank you both for joining me today on this program.
Thank you so much for having us.